YouTube. This is Kelly with Books I'm Not Reading, and I'm here today to, well, first of all, wish all of those of you who are mothers, grandmothers, maybe great-grandmothers, happy Mother's Day. And I was out doing yard work. Not my favorite chore, but I did happen to see some plants creeping up that I am hoping will be lilies of the valley. And that instantly makes me think of my mother and my grandmother. If you're an old Job's daughter, you'll know what I'm talking about. But anyway, and that led me to thinking about the books that they drove me to read. They could be, both of them could be very persistent. And I wish my mother lived closer so I could see her more often and talk to her about books more often. But they were both very big readers, and so I just wanted to share with you a few of their favorites in honor of them today. So the first one is, and I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this or not. Dang it! There we go. Kind of The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. Oh my goodness, like I can't tell you how many times we talked about this book. I don't know if my grandmother read it with a group of her friends, but I just remember one of her friends had this story about how she was like cooking and reading the book at the same time. And anyway, so it was kind of one of those books that I eventually was like, okay, I have to read this so they stop asking me about it. And I actually picked it for the book club that I'm in with Jason, and that was a big moment. The discussion of that book was a big moment in our own relationship. But the book, it was okay. It doesn't live long in my memory except for all the other associations, all of the other times I can remember my mother and my grandmother just gushing over that book. And I know that my grandmother did read more Isabel Allende after that. I think I read one more of her books. Anyway, the next one, I have talked about this on this channel many times, so I won't belabor the point, but it was always one of those things, like, it would come up and I'd be like, oh, I haven't read that. And there was just this look of such surprise and, like, what do you mean? You haven't read Gone with the Wind yet? And then, of course, when I finally did read it, I was like, why did I wait so long to read this amazing book? Need to reread this. It's been a long time. It's been 13 years. So yeah, I need to dive back into the story again. But one of my favorites. So the next one is one that was really important to my grandmother. And I used to go shopping with my grandmother. When I went to college, I lived in the same town that she did, and so sometimes we'd spend Saturdays together, things like that. But she was such a force in a bookstore, and she would just go around, and I mean, she would just have these huge piles of books. Anyway, and periodically she would look at me and she'd be like, have you read this? And I'd be like, no, and she would just add it to the pile. And I never quite knew when we were shopping, like, which books were for me, which books were hers. Of course, if I asked her for any book, she would definitely buy it, even if she thought it was silly. But anyway, so again, this is O Pioneers by Willa, Cather, and this was my actual introduction to Willa Cather's books. I have since read several others, and I do really still love this book and treasure it, and just remember that moment of her kind of like reading fury, like, how can you be in college and not have read O Pioneers? So anyway, this is a great book. Okay, the next one, all right, so just bear with me. The cover of the edition I have is horrible. I was actually saving this for a haul video because not too long ago I saw one of Steve Donahue's Brattle hauls, and he purchased this book, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like, I need a copy of that because I remembered it, and he of course got a beautiful hardcover edition from the Brattle for probably a couple bucks or free with all of his credit there or whatever. So Anyway, unfortunately, our used bookstore, the copy that was in the best shape at the moment. So if I find a copy somehow that's has a better cover and is in better condition, I will be swapping this out. So don't be horrified, but this is the Far Pavilions, and it's actually, this edition was made for the HBO miniseries, hence the people on the cover, but my cover the cover that we had anyway, looked more like this. So the Far Pavilions is by MMK, and this is a book about India. She also wrote another great book called, I think it was like The Shadow of the Wind, In the Shadow of the Wind. Anyway, and so this was a book that was just around our house growing up, and my mother was just loved it, and really encouraged me to read it. And of course, I think I read this probably in maybe high school or sooner. So yeah, but it's just is a great, really gripping story, and I think actually, I hope Jason will read this at some point, because he loves books about India. So this is a great book that loomed large in our house. And finally, the last book I want to share with you is The Daughter of Time by Josephine Kaye. And Josephine Kaye, unfortunately, I think she was killed in a car crash. She died in 1952. And this book is part of the Detective or Inspector Alan Grant series. I have read all of the Alan Grant books now, but I don't know that it necessarily you need to read them in order. I read this one first, and it is not the first one. This one is actually about Richard III, and Inspector Alan Grant has been injured, and he's in the hospital, and he doesn't have anything to do with his time, and somebody brings him some books to read, and then he starts doing more and more research about Richard III, and it is just really a fascinating mystery, unlike any other mystery I've ever read. If you are interested and you do feel like you have to read them in order, of course, eventually I got all of them. And the first one in the Alan Grant series is The Man in the Queue. But anyway, so those are a few of my mother and grandmother's favorite books. This one especially, I mean, I remember the first time Jason met my grandmother. I like cued him and prepped him in the car on the way over, like, okay, she's going to ask you if you've read Dick Francis. She's going to ask you if you've read Tony Hillerman. She's going to ask you if you've read The Daughter of Time. And anyway, when this question came about, we happened to be standing in front of one of her many bookcases, and so she just grabbed a copy off and gave it to him. And then as we were looking at her books, I found another copy of it. So it was the kind of thing that she would probably buy multiple copies of so that she could give it away and share it with someone else. So I really miss my grandmother a lot, and I do wish that my mother lived closer and that we would get to read some things together. So anyway, again, happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to those of you who are grandmothers and such. And I hope it's a great weekend for all of you. I will talk to you soon. Remember to be kind to yourself and to be kind to others. I'll talk to you later, BookTube. Take care.